In every India-Pakistan crisis of the 21st century, whether it's the 1999 Kargil War, the 2001 Parliament attack, the 2008 26/11 Mumbai siege, the 2019 Balakot airstrike, or even now in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor, the United States has played a role, sometimes overt, sometimes behind the curtains. Washington walks a diplomatic tightrope in South Asia. On the one side, a long-standing security partnership with Pakistan shaped by decades of Cold War and post-9/11 terror landscape when Pakistan became a major frontline non-NATO ally of the United States. On the other, over the last 20-25 years, a rapidly deepening strategic partnership with India driven by a shared concern over a rising China and also maintaining a liberal international order. But as recent events in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor show, this balancing act by America is growing harder to sustain.
My administration helped broker a full and immediate ceasefire, I think a permanent one, between India and Pakistan, ending a dangerous conflict of two nations with lots of nuclear weapons.
The Trump administration and its eagerness to take credit for the de-escalation in Operation Sindoor's aftermath may have been theatrics, may have been Trump being a politician trying to gain political credit, but it was not entirely without cold political logic. Multiple credible reports suggest that high-level communications, both formal and back-channel, did occur between Washington and New Delhi, of course between Washington and Islamabad as well, in the 4 days that happened between the 7th of May when Operation Sindoor was carried out and the 10th of May when a ceasefire was eventually called. There are on-record conversations that have happened between Vice President J.D. Vance and Prime Minister Modi, as well as multiple conversations between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his Indian and Pakistani counterparts. The Americans may not have brokered peace, but they were certainly pressing for peace. The call that sealed the deal happened between Rubio and Munir on the 10th morning. This duality, and some would say a double standard that America exhibits, is not new. In public, Washington champions bilateralism between India and Pakistan. For the public consumption, it says that India and Pakistan must resolve their differences directly. But in private and behind the scenes, Washington often plays the emergency operator, it patches calls, nudges pauses, and leans just enough on both sides to manage the escalation. That's what happened in 1999. It was President Bill Clinton back then who pressed Nawaz Sharif, who had gone to the White House with an SOS call to end the Kargil War. 25 years later, Trump's lieutenants were in on the act, whether it was J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio. For India, this selective invisibility has always been a problem. There is a pattern here which Washington has followed over the last 25 years. It's a pattern that India watches very closely and is extremely wary of. During the height of the current crisis, several US officials, including the Secretary of State, issued measured statements saying it's up to India and Pakistan to figure out a solution. In fact, J.D. Vance, in an interview to Fox News, had said it was none of America's business. They condemned the terrorism by Pakistan, but at the same time called for restraint by both sides. Now, while technically they're being even-handed, the implication was that India's calibrated strike against terror deserved to be seen in the same light and in parity with Pakistan's use of terror proxies. So in one stroke, essentially what America was doing was equating both the victim and the perpetrator of terror. At the same time that America was working to de-escalate the military tension between India and Pakistan, it was also ratcheting up pressure on India on unrelated fronts, particularly on the trade front, where Trump and his administration officials have been locked in multi-week negotiations with Indian officials, as they have indeed had negotiations with other partners as well. Long-standing differences on the trade domain, whether it's on digital taxes, agricultural market access, the duties on agricultural products, pharmaceuticals, these were suddenly back in the focus as part of the Trump tariff negotiations. Behind closed doors, there have been conversations about how Washington perhaps was using this crisis between India and Pakistan as some form of leverage to extract commercial concessions. Now, many would see that this is an opportunistic tactic, it's a tone-deaf tactic, and most importantly, it was creating parity between the victim and the perpetrator. The contradiction in this strategy by the United States is stark. India was being urged to exercise restraint in the border against a state that sponsors terrorism, At the same time, India was also being pushed on other issues by the very same country that is asking India to show restraint. For Delhi, mediation on Kashmir is a hot red line. It's not just a symbolic question, it's a strategic question. Accepting any form of third-party involvement, particularly from a superpower who has its own agenda, risks legitimizing Pakistan's long-standing demand to internationalize the Kashmir issue. That is why successive Indian governments across party lines, whether ruled by the BJP or by the Congress, have firmly rejected any idea of foreign mediation. This has been the Government of India's stated position since the Shimla Agreement of 1972. And there have been wars thereafter, but none where there's been open mediation by any superpower. And yet, Donald Trump continues to persist. America doesn't call it mediation, they call it crisis management, they call it de-escalation, they call it engaging with both parties at the same time. But the effect is the same, particularly when the announcement came like what Trump did, preempting what should have been a formal announcement by the government of India and then by the government of Pakistan. Trump took to Truth Social, in a way preempting the claim of a ceasefire, which distorts the ground reality and it misrepresents India's position on how the cessation of hostilities was brought about. Also, in private conversations, Indian diplomats have expressed frustration that every military action against terror is quickly folded into a broader India-Pakistan framework. That reduces it from a counter-terror operation to making it a bilateral issue. This framing serves America's interests, but it doesn't serve India's interests. To understand what the American security calculus is, one must look beyond New Delhi and beyond Islamabad. You should firmly gaze at what is happening in Beijing, in Kabul, and in Moscow. First, America's strategic priority in South Asia has always been in containing Chinese assertiveness, whether it is militarily, technologically, and economically. India is central to that effort. America needs a strong, stable, and capable India which can hold its own in the Indo-Pacific against a hegemonic China. That is in America's interest. But an India that is distracted and embroiled in a subcontinental conflict with Pakistan, that is not necessarily in America's interest. Second is Afghanistan. Despite the fact that US troops have withdrawn a few years ago, the United States still has counterterrorism interests in Afghanistan, particularly because China has been making deep inroads into Afghanistan in a way to expand its Belt and Road Initiative. So to that extent, Pakistan still matters because Pakistan still is a supply hub for drone logistics, back-channel influence over the Taliban, and also, most importantly, for counterintelligence sharing. Washington cannot afford a full rupture with the generals in Rawalpindi. And third, and perhaps one important part of this equation, is global energy flows. Any India-Pakistan conflict risks regional destabilization, which can have an immediate rattling effect on oil markets. Oil prices could go soaring up. Now, the United States wants to calm down oil prices, not least because it will have a knock-on effect on the American consumer, but also in the regional dynamics. India has been depending for the last 3 years on cheap Russian oil since the Ukraine war began. Any war in the subcontinent would only further drive up India's dependence even more on cheap Russian oil. So in that context, American diplomacy is not about backing India as a strategic partner, it is simply about managing equilibrium between India and Pakistan. America's role in South Asia is not necessarily that of an honest broker. It is a superpower that is looking out and managing its own interests. And that is fine. That's what countries do. That's what they do in their own national interest, so long as India sees what America is doing in the subcontinent for what it's worth.